be thinking is rather casual attire on my part. Everybody is so nattily dressed in uniform, and here I am with jeans and boots on. In the interest of full disclosure, I'm going to be filling potholes today, which is a good thing. Yeah, you can applaud that. But equally important, we're here this morning to, as I said, bring you up to date with what has been occurring over the course of the last several months, but particularly as we embrace 2018 as a new year, this being the end of the month. I kind of give the community a report as to the important priorities that IMPD and our criminal justice efforts are pursuing. We're gathered today in no small measure because the well-being of our community is dependent upon all of us working together to uplift it. We're gathered here today with the understanding, the shared understanding that, frankly, the level of crime in Indianapolis is unacceptable. We're gathered here today because while we are exhausting all available resources, all staff, all personnel and person power to protect the safety of our residents, we acknowledge that more must be done if we are to reverse this unacceptable trend of the mindless menace of violence that still plagues too many of our neighborhoods, too many of the streets in our community. Because crime affects all of us. And we have to acknowledge that more than the victims of the crime, we too are victims as a community. And whenever a neighbor is harmed, we are harmed. Crime degrades us all, whether we are personally affected by it or not. And that means ultimately that it is our responsibility to the community to be as transparent as possible, not only for the sake of accountability, but also for the sake of landing upon the best possible solutions to the challenges that we face. Because the decisions we make and the steps we take to stem this rising tide of violence must be taken together. All of us. Shared responsibility. And it is in these gatherings where this city's path forward will be shaped. Together. You know, the future is uncertain, but what we must do is clear. Stand together for a stronger and a safer community. And the movement to make Indianapolis better is up to us. That's why we're here today. That's why we share our data. That's why we give updates on our initiatives. That's why we are providing an arena for the community to not only be heard, but for the community to help shape our efforts to move forward. And we'll, as I said, continue to hold these meetings. We'll continue to hold ourselves accountable for crime in our city. And we're not going to be bashful about continuing to ask for your help in this effort. The people of this city are why we wake up every morning determined to make each day as bright as this day is. And you, the community, are why we will not rest until that is not just a vision, but a reality. I refuse to believe that crime in Indianapolis is incurable. I'm not going to accept that, and you shouldn't either. Together, we'll return Indianapolis to where we know we can be, and that is rooted, deeply rooted, in the legacy of peace as one city. Chief.
Well, good morning. I think there doesn't take much more explanation. I think the mayor said it well. Let me talk just a little bit about stewardship and kind of what it means to me and why we, as a police department, chose that word. The mayor so graciously over the last few months has said that the buck stops with him, and including the violence here in our city, and that it's his responsibility, and has said it's his fault. But he's also giving that responsibility to his police department as me as the chief of police. So as we attempt to draw closer and closer to the community and attempt to allow the community to understand crime as we understand it, I think it's important that we as stewards of public safety report out. Tell you what it is we're trying to do, be open with you about our shortcomings, our failures, and also our successes. So we're going to spend probably 40 slides. Please don't go to sleep. It won't be me just talking to you. All the command staff is here. We appreciate their concern. We appreciate the Southeast District and the Community Council bringing some of you folks together. The timing of this and the dates of this meeting will change. We'll have it once a month. It'll be towards the end of the month. We're trying to balance our media partners so that this message can get out to as many people as possible, and at the same time, the needs of the community and their ability to get here. So we will have afternoon meetings, we'll have morning meetings, we'll have evening meetings throughout this year. Each month we'll have a different topic, but you'll see as we go through this, there are some goals that IMPD has set, and each one of those goals will be addressed throughout the coming months. Some of it is in its infancy, and so the idea is ultimately that we as a city understand the issues that the police face, and that we as a police understand the issues that the community faces in their neighborhoods, so collectively we can have an impact on the problems. So let me introduce Chief Taylor, who's going to walk you through a lot of the activities that we performed this year, and there were a lot of successes. I think we get lost in the number of homicides and the number of non-fatal shootings. In fear of being wrong, I wanted to communicate because I think it's important that you know all the work that the men and women of the police department have done. I have looked at our preliminary data. This is not UCR. This is dirty, dirty, dirty. Did I say dirty data? So it's not verified yet. But I've been on the police department for a while, and as you look at our dirty data, we are dirty consistently until that gets cleaned up. So percentage-wise, typically it mirrors what UCR is, but our overall crime in Indianapolis is down almost 10%. That's property crimes, it's all of your Part 1 crimes. Our violent crime, if you look at rapes, robberies, aggravated assaults, and homicides, it's down close to 6%. Again, that's dirty data. We won't know probably till March what those final numbers are. But I think it's significant, and it shows all the work that's going on, and it's not just about our homicides. So us focusing on homicides is very important, and but at the same time, it's not taking away from the efforts that we were doing in all other crimes.
Good morning. So I was going to put a disclaimer out. I'm just going to let you do this. I'm not a technology guy, so when Kendall gave this to me, I knew it was going to be a problem. But I'm honored, I'm glad to be able to share with you achievements that the department had in 2017. Starting with reestablishing the Indianapolis Violence Reduction Program, the IVRP. That was a program that we had a number of years ago, and I think the idea was great. It just didn't quite catch on the way we hoped. I feel much better about it this time. It's a collaboration of law enforcement and community and other groups to try to help get an idea of what crimes are occurring where and what can we do with those. The high-intensity drug trafficking area designation is big, HIDTA. That allows us to have resources and federal money that comes in and different experience from other officers across the state especially to help in drug trafficking. The Strategic Initiative Coordinator position was filled by Lieutenant Karen Arnett. She does a great job in making contact with the community and especially in the areas of talking with victims of the homicides, the murders that occur. But her and her team do a great job, so we're glad to have them. We reduced pharmacy robberies by 39% in 2016 and 2017, in large part due to our help with our federal partners. Prescription drug boxes have been located at all the district roll calls. That, of course, is an effort to get drugs that are no longer used by the patient so they don't get stolen or used by someone who doesn't need them. Proactive investigative units have been focusing on violence. So there's a number of units throughout the different investigative units that will help in focusing on particular people or specific crime. Increased communication with Operation Division relevant to non-fatal shootings. You would have thought that there would always be an open line of communication between investigation and operation, but that hasn't always been the case. And in 2017, we really turned a corner there. So detectives are having a lot more conversations with the guys and gals that are in operations in order to take care of these problems with these non-fatal shootings. As you may have heard, in a lot of these non-fatal shootings, victims are not necessarily cooperating with us, and this communication helps us to still investigate that even without their cooperation. There are 2 new homicide schools that are in cooperation with the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. We have an expedited ballistic information, about 48 hours. That helps us to track information, reference shots that are fired, bullets, and getting that information and tracing those back to weapons that are owned by particular people. Criminal Investigation Division community conversations is something that's been done just to try to make sure that the community is aware of what exactly investigations do. Some of this was started when Lieutenant Arnett was having some conversations in the community about how especially murder cases are investigated, and in particular we invited the prosecutor's office to come and explain some of the ins and outs, the pitfalls to those investigations and what we really need from the community and in order to help get those cases prosecuted. We had increased homicide staffing from 25 to 28 detectives. That was huge. 3 more detectives is not a huge number, but it definitely helps. Increased task force officers with federal partners. Those are officers that we have that work with our federal partners, ATF, FBI, Safe Streets, all these different organizations. We've increased those numbers in order to firm up that partnership and of course get results because of that. Continued reduction of violence occurring within the beats and reduction of criminal homicides in the beats. So in beat policing, which you hear the chief talk about, one of the main goals is to get officers in there to really be able to work with the public, and we're starting to see that that has helped from the standpoint of reducing the crimes, and we hope to continue to do that. Kendall? Thank you. So the goal here is 100% engagement from our officers to the community, of course, in order to help with that communication, help build those relationships. A lot of times we think about that as just being the youth, but it's not. It's across the board of all ages. That's one of the things that we really hope to accomplish in the beat policing as well. Criminal incident response is just a coordinated effort really between everybody to try to make things happen for the best and get our most bang for our buck on any particular crime. Enhancement of ComStat, in addition of administrative reviews. Those are things, ComStat is usually done in operations, but it's information that's coming in about different people we need to know about different crimes, all those kind of things. And the administrative reviews also have to do with how our officers are responding to different incidents. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? Dismantling of prolific offender groups known as the Grundy Crew. You know anything about them? It's a dangerous group, and we've been working with other partners to try to get them contained and get them off the street. Development of community resource district councils. That is relatively new. That allows the public in every district to basically have a say-so and be involved in what is going on in their particular district. So each district has one. They're attended by a number of different people, a number of different community members. I think that's going to ultimately serve each district well. Applied resources to the MCAT pilot, so we supplied officers to this unit. It has had a number of runs. The Mobile Crisis Assistant Team does a lot of things, especially with those needing mental health.
Hey, Randy.
Yes, sir.
Could I have Director Babcock is here, just got a report about MCAT. Would you mind sharing that real quick? Could you do it now, and we'll bring it up later?
Thanks. As the chief said, my name is Paul Babcock, Director of the Office of Public Health and Safety. And with IMPD and Eskenazi Health, as well as Midtown Health, we established the Mobile Crisis Assistance Team as a part of the mayor's criminal justice reforms to bring a public health approach to public safety issues in Marion County. And as the chief said, the Mobile Crisis Assistance Team is a police officer, a paramedic, and a licensed clinical social worker working together to respond to behavioral health runs. And in that, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, over the course of the last 6 months, they've responded to approximately 700 runs. And we've really been able to identify a number of success stories through this program and really reduce the number of individuals going to be incarcerated because there's really no other option for our officers or paramedics. Hopefully in the next month or so, we'll be able to clean up the data that we have to be able to provide a much more detailed report about this success, and then leverage the resources we have to continue to expand it throughout the county. But this program wouldn't be possible without the support of IMPD and our other partners across the county. So I really want to thank them and thank the chief for the opportunity to just really quickly go over that. I'll let you get back.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So over 5,500 youth served through the Community Engagement Office. That is the group that also runs the Police Athletic League. But all these kids are not necessarily involved in sports. There's other things we get them involved in, and I'm glad to see that number seems to be on the rise. The Behavioral Health Unit, BHU, conducted over 1,600 home visits. That's another unit that tries to help out somewhat with people with mental issues, but also people are dealing with drug issues and other things like that. Over 1,200 jobs referrals through the Indianapolis Parole and Accountability Teams. That's Impact. They do a fantastic job of really trying to make sure that all the parolees get attended to, and we, of course, try to help them with their jobs and make sure that they are able to stay on the right path. So, Chief? Yep.
I thought maybe I was smarter than Randy, but evidently I'm not. Dang it. All right, go to the next. So back in July, we had an unfortunate incident with the shooting of, officer-involved shooting of Aaron Bailey. At that time, a few weeks afterwards, the mayor made some announcements about some of the things, some of the reforms that we were going to make. And so I thought, as part of the achievements, it would be wise to kind of talk to you about some of those and our progress in those. One of those was our use of force policy. There was a committee that was created. They identified 21 recommendations that they thought were important. We have created action steps. It's not enough just to have a recommendation, but how do you put that into policy and how do you put that into action? So we've created those steps. There is a national consensus policy that came out in January of 2017, so we've taken that and incorporated it into our existing use of force policy. That first draft was created with some outside help, our training academy, and our officers. That first draft has been completed and is now being formatted in our general orders for last-minute update and review of our executive staff. And we're happy to present that once that is finished. We established some roll call training and talking about time and distance and cover and concealment and de-escalation and all those things. We have our trainers now going out to roll calls, helping our supervisors understand it and helping supervisors teach that. We learned some things from that. 15, 20 minutes is enough to deliver some information, but not really enough to answer all the questions that the officer has, so we're trying to expand that and get better at that. Implicit bias training, we brought in a group called Fair and Impartial Policing out of Florida, recommended by the Department of Justice and all the acronyms within the police department. That was, we brought in October, we brought in Fair and Impartial Policing, the founder of it, and we had 15 police officers and command staff, and then we had 15 community members, and we did that twice. It was a 2-day school. It was very interactive, a lot of crucial conversations that were had, a lot of different perspectives from the community and the police shared, and I think at the end everyone walked out of that with a better understanding of each other. We did that twice. One of the things that came out of that, probably jumping ahead, but one of the things that came out of that is we have a biased policing general order. That general order was given to all those participants, and they were allowed to look at it, critique it, add things that they thought were important, or subtract language that they didn't think was important. I've got a stack from all of those that now needs to be collated and gone through and reviewed based on our general order, and that needs to be updated, so we're walking through that. Fair and Impartial Policing, the founder also came in and trained 30 police officers on how to teach fair and impartial policing. The intent is to have all of our officers through Fair and Impartial Policing and to begin that this year. I struggle with that a little bit because the impact that we had in Fair and Impartial Policing was because you had a community member and police officer having those discussions. And I'm fearful that having a police officer teach that to other police officers, we're going to lose some of those crucial conversations. So I've got to figure out how to bring the community in so that the conversations that were so well done when we were there combined continue. So we have to figure that out still. Afterwards, we brought the founder of Fair and Impartial Policing back out, had the community, invited the community to the Tinley Accelerated School, talked to them, gave them a brief description of Fair and Impartial Policing and biased policing, and that we all have biases. It's just recognizing those and then not acting on the negative biases that we have. So we were able to talk to them, we're able to get some suggestions and hear their viewpoints also. We spent probably an hour and a half or 2 hours with members of the community. We created the mayor asked that we create an Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We did that. I assigned a captain to it. He has been reaching out. All of our schools and a lot of the organizations here in Marion County have a director over diversity and inclusion. And so that's something that we've always tried to do, but we haven't had anybody that's focused on that. So now we're in a much better place. Because of that, we have joined the Marion County Diversity and Inclusion Forum, which has different organizations within Marion County, and they're discussing how they are inclusive in their different organizations. We wanted to start with our academy, and it's not just about hiring and promotion. As you can see, it's about equity. Minorities need to feel that there's equity in the jobs, and their ability to progress is the same as anyone else. Our curriculum has to be looked at. One of the things that we did was we gave our training and our curriculum to outside sources, people that teach for a living, scholars, and they reviewed that. And it came back as, hey, you're doing a good job. There were some changes within some of the case law that's been updated. But I think the most significant thing was it was a view, that curriculum was created in the view of a police officer's mind. And so it was having someone else review that, a civilian that is not a police officer, and making suggestions about that curriculum so that it would be more diverse and more inclusive. Because a lot of things we say and understand based on our backgrounds is not necessarily perceived the right way. So we did that also. So I've jumped to the training and curriculum. We also had de-escalation training. We brought in Dolan Consulting Group. We had 20 to 30, which Chris was one of them, train the trainers. So now we have officers on the police department that can teach de-escalation training. We want to provide that for all of our officers this year, and we want to reach out to the community and explain that to them also. So that might be a good topic for our community councils at some point. Very quickly, let me review violence, 2017. This chart shows, and Kendall, I'm going to ask you to bounce back and forth on these because not really in order that it's helpful. 2010 to 2017, we think it's important to see not just a look at last year and this year, but historically. 2012 to 2013 is significant. That's a significant jump where you go from 100 homicides all of a sudden to 125. We as a police department need to think about what happened. Is there anything that we did? Is there anything that we included or omitted that may have made that occur? 2017, we've had 154 homicides. If you go to the next slide. Chief Taylor talked about beat policing. In 2016, we moved back to beat policing. We identified 15 beats. There were actually 19, 4 of them were entertainment zones, but 15, what you think of as beat policing. That covered probably 15 square miles of our 400 square miles here in Marion County. In 2016, there were 49 homicides in those beats in that 15 square miles. In 2017, there was 34, which is a 30% decrease. In 2015, in 2016, I think that was 33% of all the homicides that occurred in Marion County occurred in those beats. In 2015, 44% of the homicides, all the homicides that occurred in Marion County occurred in those beats. So you're at about a 46% increase since we went to beat policing. I'll talk about how we're moving back to beat policing and why we couldn't do that in 16 and 17 so far. Next slide. Non-fatal shootings, we talk about non-fatal shootings, that decision to pull the trigger. Same emotions, same reasons, it's just that the person didn't die. In these same beats, in 2016 there were 120, in 2017 there were 106. I think, and I may have that, in 2015, 36% of all non-fatal shootings occurred in that 15 square miles. 36%. In 2016, it was 28% of all of non-fatal shootings, and then in 17, it's reduced to 24%. So focusing law enforcement efforts in those beats and communicating to those people in those communities, we have seen over the last 3 years a drastic decrease. So now you've got 24%, which is still staggering. 24% of all of our non-fatal shootings are in those beats. So we understand that it's still important. It's very important to be policing smaller geographic areas and taking some accountability and ownership of those. Next slide. And this is where we'll bounce back and forth a little bit. If you remember the slide before the homicides, between 2012 and 2013, we made that significant jump. We went from 96 homicides to 125. If you look at our hiring and separation, this is from 2007 to 2017. If you look at 2011 and 2012 and 2013, we hired 20 officers. If you look at the separations, we lost about 130. So we lost 110 officers during that same time period when our homicides were going up. More police, not the total answer, but there's a correlation there. Also, what's significant, and I don't think we have a slide, but I'll try from memory. In 2012, we had 1,535 police officers. We have 1,654, I think, today. Now, 1635 is significant because I didn't have any new police officers, right? So I didn't have anybody in the academy. I didn't have anybody in the FTO program. typically, like today, we have about 100 officers that are either in the academy or they're in the training. So that 1654 number is really 100 of those officers are really of no use to you and I. They're being trained. That 1535 number is a real number. There wasn't anybody in training. There were 1,535 officers in 2012. That's also the time that we pulled away from beat policing and went to zone policing, because we wanted to hold the officers accountable. It didn't make sense that a beat over here that had a lot of activity and a beat down here that didn't have as much activity. The workload and the accountability was skewed in my mind by officers. So we thought if we put them together, have them patrol the larger areas together, then I can hold 3 officers accountable more than the one. So it was just going from beats to zone was just sheer trying to maintain a better workload for our officers. 1558 in 2014, the reason I show you this, 1558, that number, we had people in the academy. If you'll go back to the slide, Kimdale. So in 2014, we hired 92 officers and we lost 70. So that number, and then 2015, we hired 151 and 72, but during that year, all of these were in the academy and training. All of these are in the academy and training. So if you'll go back to the next slide. And this is way too much information, but I think it makes a point. So this number, remember we hired 70-some policemen here. So that 1558, you got to subtract that. So really that number is worse than this number when you went to zone policing. You get up here, 1653, I think we had 150 in some sort of training. So really that 1653 is lower than that number. It wasn't until 2016 when the mayor came in and said, hey, we're going to hire a net increase of 31 officers for each of the 4 years of my term, where we've been able to turn that around. And that's when we started going to be policing 1646 and 16. We just started really getting above that number. Last year, our goal was to end with 1681. We ended the year with 1,674 policemen. At the end of this year, we'll have 1,712. So the ability to plan and forecast and have a mayor and a city county council that is supportive of increasing our police department, the numbers, is going to allow us to go back to beat policing. Next slide, please. This is where we're at now. These large colored areas are each of our districts. Downtown's in the center. These areas are excluded cities. They have their own policing. And then the beats I talked about are these areas here. These beats were picked out mainly because of their violence or the propensity to have violence. I just told you the stats of the percentage of non-fatal shootings and homicides. So that's what we look like now. That's the map you just saw. This map is 2008. Zones, there are about 33 zones and 15 beats. This beat map in 2008, which was created after the merger of the Sheriff's Department and the Police Department, I think there were 101 beats. We're going back to beats. I don't know what that map will look like, but it'll look much more like this than it will that. And Chief Connect can talk to you about beats as we move forward, to give you an idea of how we're going to get there and the mindset kind of around that and the change that we're trying to do with officers. Next slide. We thought it was important that you and our officers know what we're going to focus on this year. And these are the things that all of us as an executive staff, with some input from our officers and also the community, trying to get our head around this last year. What are some major steps and major things that we need to focus on? First one is gun violence. Next month, we'll spend quite a bit of time on talking about gun violence, and Deputy Chief Bailey will talk about that. If you can go back to the slide. We'll talk about operational strength. I just spoke to that a little bit. Chief Cunningham, who's our Deputy Chief of Administration, will talk about that. Chief Connect will talk about beat policing. He's over operations. I'll come back and talk to you a little bit about the importance of the personnel development, and then the last part, Sentinel event review. So, Chief Bailey.
Morning. Everyone still awake? All right. going to touch on each one of these bullet points. Some of them are combined, so I'll mention that as we go through. The Indianapolis Gun Intelligence and Investigations Initiative is a partnership between all those agencies that you see up there. What this is very similar to what around the country is called a CGIC, or a Crime Gun Intelligence Center. It's a BJA project that centralizes investigations surrounding gun crimes using the NIBIN system, federal partners, United States Attorney's Office, the district DA, wherever that jurisdiction is, ATF investigators, and police department investigators. Here in Indianapolis, we've taken a little bit different view of that. Rather than being centralized, it's a decentralized model built upon cooperation between all those agencies that I just said. It will focus on individuals who illegally possess firearms and use those firearms in the commission of their crimes. And it starts really at the basic level, the district officer level and detective level, when they first encounter a gun, treating that gun as a crime scene, leaving it in place, and then calling in a specialized officer through our gun liaison program who knows how to collect that gun, take DNA evidence from the gun. They've been specially trained on how to interview that suspect then at the scene to try to lock statements in from that individual. That gun is then taken to the property room where it's put in as evidence. The crime lab, one of our partners, comes over, grabs the gun. They take it to the crime lab. It's test fired, and then the analysis of that gun is put into the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, which is short for NIBIN. NIBIN then looks at that fired cartridge casing and see if it's connected to any other crimes in the city. Before, that process would take months. Now we're able to turn that around within 48 hours. That information is given to detectives who then can link serial shooters to crimes, and then sometimes we have a homicide, but we don't recover the weapon. This NIBIN system has allowed us in recent months to recover firearms used in homicides that help prosecute those offenders that are responsible for that. We've also been able to identify cases where, in one particular incident, where one individual juvenile is linked to 5 different shootings around the city of Indianapolis. This is really a game changer for us, and it's in partnership with everybody that you see up there. Additionally, as part of that, the ATF has assigned one of their agents, and then our task force officer has been assigned to each of the service districts. What that allows us to do is have a relationship where we have those most violent offenders who are committing crimes with guns, and then they, in cooperation with the United States Attorney's Office, decides who can prosecute that offender most effectively and try to get the worst of the worst off the street and protect our citizens. The IVRP is the Indianapolis Violence Reduction Partnership. That involves every law enforcement agency in the county, all of our partners at the federal level, the parole, probation, community corrections. We all meet every 2 weeks and we review every non-fatal shooting, every homicide, looking for those that we know may retaliate, those that need extra attention from the police department. And not only do we look at just individuals, we look at behaviors and areas. Recently, through IVRP, we identified an area on Southeast District that had a disproportionate amount of violent crime toward the end of 2007. Working in partnership with all those partners, we had a operation down there last week that was really successful. 19 guns seized in a 4-day period, all illegally possessed guns. And we know that as we get guns off the street, we save lives. We'll never be able to put that in a stat, but every gun we take out of the hands of somebody that shouldn't have one is a life that we save. We're still developing this IVRP process. It gets better each and every week. One of the parts that Chief Roach added recently was community IVRP. We're sharing more information with our district councils. Last week was the first week that we actually shared non-fatal shooting victims and information with the councils. And the purpose of that, with a brief synopsis of this, was to encourage those that can reach out and wrap their arms around some of these folks, do so, offer them services so that they can avoid the attention of law enforcement and give the community the first crack at trying to change lives in the neighborhood because at some point they are going to be encountered by the police, and we want to avoid that. So that's the purpose of that. Chief Taylor mentioned a little bit earlier, but all of our proactive units, both in investigations and operations, have been directed to focus their investigations on nexus to violent crime. Those units include the flex teams, narcotics, vice, interdiction, the gang unit, and our federal liaisons. So we know that a lot of our homicides revolve around the drug trade. We're focusing on those type of crimes, and also parole and probation visits for those individuals who just recently got out of jail, who have been out of jail, who are convicted of a violent crime. What we found a lot of times when we visit these folks, they have more guns and more drugs when they're not supposed to. So we're focusing our officers specifically on people, not just casting out a wide net in our neighborhoods, hoping to catch a big fish, but really being very narrowly focused on those that we know are creating the most trouble in the neighborhoods. Okay, do we switch it? All right. Talked about our focused efforts. As soon as the Office of Public Health and Safety is working on hiring a director of community violence reduction, we'll begin sharing that same information that we now share with our community councils with that director, and then the street outreach workers can then do what we just said, is to try to get in contact with these folks ahead of time and prevent them from having any kind of law enforcement intervention. Last year, or this year, or 2017, we seized as a department 3,235 crime guns. These aren't just guns taken for safekeeping. These are guns illegally possessed or used in some sort of commission of a crime. That's an increase of 250 guns from the previous year. We hope that number is higher this year as we refocus everyone's efforts on taking guns out of the hands of those who have no business and no right to possess one. And we're going to talk about this last bullet point in further detail later, as the United States Attorney Josh Minkler and Prosecutor Curry talk about it. But in addition to the ATF assigning people to the district, we've assigned, or they have assigned, a specific prosecutor from the Marion County Prosecutor's Office and the United States Attorney at every one of the districts in order to expedite and look and really analyze the gun cases and see where the most accountability can be held from those violent offenders who just don't get the message. There'll be more information on that in the coming weeks. But that is all part of that initiative I talked about at the beginning, and others that will be announced by the United States Attorney's Office. Chief Cunningham? Now it's time for the nerd talk from the Administration Division.
I knew something exciting was coming in that introduction, so good morning all. I have the most positive slide in the presentation. That's why he's jealous. So thanks to our mayor, Joe Hogsett, in 2016, he set a vision that is a path moving forward. It's a clear path for growth for our agency, for your police department. And that's very exciting, because in the past we tend to focus on how many officers we could hire every year. That means nothing if you don't consider the attrition, how many you lose. So this mayor said, you guys learn your math, because we're going to focus on net 31. So we're hiring a class every year, 2 classes, 1 class in June, 1 class in December. And I can't tell you how large the December class is going to be right now, because I have to do that math. Net 31, a path for growth, positive growth. The commitment is to have a highly trained police department that offers professional service to this community, to our community. The reason I say this is the most positive side, nothing nerdy about it, unless we're all nerds, because I'm going to grab all of you and say, my best recruiters to make that happen are sitting right here in this room. They're the other men and women that I work with on the agency, and they're you, my community. Who do you want to police your community? Who do you want to provide public service? So please, soon you'll start seeing our bus ads again, the Join IMPD. You'll start hearing radio advertisements. And please, everywhere you go, please be an advertisement for us for that hiring. So as the chief mentioned earlier, we didn't hire for 2 years, 2012, 2013. Whether or not that contributed to the spike in crime that happened after in 2013, when we moved away from the beat policing to the zone policing and our levels went low, we don't know. However, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't take the opportunity to say, and just assume that it did, and re-energize our force, get our strength back up. Our budget, through the mayor's commitment, focuses on that net 31 officers a year. It is funded to hire 31 officers a year, but with that comes a commitment to diversity. Chief Roach has made the commitment. We look at our percentage and how reflective we are of the community we serve. We haven't done a very good job in the past. He's committed to not go for numbers just to up the force, but to have the right numbers so that we are reflective of that community. And I will tell you, in the last few recruit classes, we have increased our percentages in the minority groups in those classes. They're very diverse. And right now we have one of the most diverse recruit classes in the academy that we have ever had. So it's very encouraging. With that, we also have a program called the Cadet Program, where we have individuals from our community, 18 to 23 years of age. They are in a program, they have an interest in law enforcement. They're working with us in a part-time capacity, 20 hours a week. They're able to basically check out all areas of our police department, find out where they may be interested in, and we're hoping to hold on to them as they become old enough to join our agency. We also have a run club on Tuesday nights. Major Mahone is in here somewhere. When he was in the recruiting unit, started it bringing in people who are just applicants. They're just in the phase. They filled out the paperwork or are going to fill out the paperwork to join our agency. We go out and work out with them on Tuesday evenings, and the whole time it's less about the workout and more about the networking and being able to talk to them and for them to see us as human beings. That's been a highly successful program, and we started last year, and in this December class, we have 6 of those individuals in this class, and they came into that class more physically fit than their classmates and more mentally sharp and more prepared. So we're doing a lot of positive things. With that, again, I'll circle back and tell you we're doing all that to build your police force, to get the ranks up, to get the highly professional officers out there to serve you, and we're doing that so that we can take this community and get down to those beat-focused levels where you have a beat officer that is not only familiar with you, but familiar with the area they serve, which is my segue away from all my nerd talk that I just nerded you with to Deputy Chief Connect.
Good morning. So I'm the calm, not passionate guy about all this, and they gave me a topic that bores me. No, honestly, this is something Chief Roach tasked me this morning with coming in and talking very briefly about beat policing. You've heard Chief Roach allude to it, you've heard Chief Cunningham allude to it, you've heard Chief Taylor allude to it, and Chief Bailey. This is the core of what we do, and we try to balance that. You heard about the economic impact and how that crisis led to a lack of hiring for several years, and we had to become very efficient. For those of you that are effective in the business world, you know that when we become very efficient, oftentimes we lose sight of being very effective. So we were becoming very efficient. We went from 103 beats to 39 zones in order to cover that area more, and we were very data driven, and we talked about our run times, how long we're there, how to make those reports, becoming very efficient in our reports. But as we learned, and the military's learned that, all community relations learned that, when you sacrifice effectiveness for efficiency, that you have to do that in order to have adequate coverage, and we needed to do that, but we also, as we lost that effectiveness, we lost some of the relationships and communications with our neighborhoods, which was more important than that efficiency. So it was a survival mode for us, but we started seeing that. So as we went through that, we had those 39 zones, and when you talk about going from 103 beats to 39 zones, obviously that's a much larger area. You become very sterile. You become a machine. You become an assembly line of I'm quick to arrive on my runs, I'm quick to handle my run, but I don't really develop as much of a problem solver attitude and beat mentality where we own an area for our responsibility, and that was where we got away from it, and that's what we're going back to. We're going to the first quarter of 2018, and we're going to return to beat policing, because when we went to those zones, we saw very quickly in those efficiency teams, and we had initially 6 focus areas. Well, voila, when we go from those large zones to 6 focus areas, we start building better relationships, we have better community interaction, we start being more effective at reducing crime and disorder. We focused on that harm-based approach, on looking at our social disorder index, how all of public safety works together, communicating with the neighborhoods, developing relationships, communicating, talking about what the issues and concerns are, not necessarily being the problem solver, but facilitating that problem solving, getting all of those resources, both public and private, together to collaborate on those. So we started becoming more effective. So we went from those 6 focus areas that were based on that social disorder index and data approach to, well, okay, let's now expand that a little bit. Let's go to 15 beats and 4 entertainment zones. So now we had 19 beats. And voila, not only did those 6 focus areas, crime and disorder, go down, but as Chief Roach alluded to earlier, our violent crime went down in all 19 of those beats. So we go through there and it becomes very apparent. We were sacrificing efficiency for effectiveness, and we needed to be effective and go back to that. As I see a lot of familiar faces in here, and we talk about those days when we did that true weed and seed-based policing, that interaction, that communicating, that problem solving, going out and having those meetings, sharing information back and forth, developing that human intelligence through relationships and communications from people that live in the neighborhoods every day, away from the electronic intelligence of data and sterile items like that that just show numbers. And that's also a mindset for our police officers. So we're going back in this quarter, and we're going to go back to beat policing. We're going to have 80 beats by March 31st, 75 to 80 beats. We started out with 103 beats, and we're not going fully back to that. And the reason that we're doing that 80 beats very quickly is we want to shift that mindset from our beat police officers very quickly. We want those men and women to have an area large enough to where we can still be efficient, but small enough to where they can be effective. They need to own that and be those communicators, those problem solvers, those facilitators in those smaller areas, and actually know the people who live, work, and entertain in those beats and become a part of that beat and own it. So that's where we're going through, and we're going to do that shift by March 31st of this year. And then we're going to develop into 2019 where we get a new CAD and RMS system. And this is where we do that long-term strategic planning. And we're going to do those underlying census tracks, IEMS, fire, neighborhood-based approaches, having communications with each neighborhood about beats, what those beat boundaries should be. And we're going to combine all of that data and all of that communication intelligence into forming the current 6 districts that we have into efficient, effective beats. That may be 80 still. It may be 125. We're not sure. But we're going to have that communication. And the big thing is now, and Chief Cunningham alluded to, how we're going to increase our staffing, and with the support of Mayor Hogsett and direction of Chief Roach, and returning there, and how we net those 31 officers a year. So we know at 80 beats, we can effectively staff that. But we can't wave that magic wand to get up to the numbers that we need to be to have all of our beats covered on every shift. But we're committing to you right now that starting March 31st, all 80 of those beats will have a beat officer on every shift. Now, there may be days where one beat officer covers 2 beats, but he or she's still responsible and has that ownership for one beat, and they're covering the other beat. But on a letter day, when it's their day off and that other letter day rotates in, that other officer will be that beat officer for the one that the officer was covering. So some officer, a man or a woman, is going to go out and be a part of that neighborhood and have that beat mentality and understand every issue, every concern, be a problem solver, be a facilitator, and communicate and be a subject matter expert in that beat, and actually know the people there and have those relationships and communications. On every shift, on every beat, we're going to have that staffing. And as our staffing increase, we can cover more and more beats and have a beat officer for every shift on every day as we go through that. That's part of that growth, and that comes through the new things. And we're not abandoning our efficiencies. That's one thing, and Chief Cunningham is very on top of the game on our efficiencies and our budgets and things, and we're not abandoning efficiency. But what we're coming to realize is that we have to balance efficiency with effectiveness and learn how to still build those relationships, learn what is effective, what's ineffective, how to have that harm-based approach to policing when we go in through and start problem solving, building those relationships. And we'll see the violent crime reduced. And as we saw already this year, our overall UCR Part 1 crimes, we believe, is going to have a pretty significant increase. And we start addressing those problems. And then when we go out and because we know we still have to be the police and have a law enforcement approach to violent crime in some instances. But as we're talking about that and communicating, none of that is a surprise to anyone. We're all on the same sheet of music as to what we're doing, why we're doing it, where we're doing it, who and where we're focused on, and what our approaches should be to address that, while we're also taking that harm-based approach to build those long-term solutions to crime and reducing violence. So that's in a nutshell where we're at now, where we're going in the next 3 months, and where we hope to go into 2019, and how we're going to shift that mindset and build those relationships, go back to beat-based policing, and how we're going to incorporate that into the new CAD and RMS going into 2019 and building those boundaries. Without further ado, Chief Roach.
Let me go through these next two slides very quickly so we can get to the community part of IVRP, which we've struggled with, plus there may be some eyes glazed over. Personnel development, if you look at our $240 million budget, how much of that is Character 1?
About 83%.
So 83% of it is in our personnel, but oftentimes we don't really do as great a job as we can in providing them clear directions, setting expectations. These goals and objectives that we talk to have been sent out to the officers so that they understand the direction that their police department is going, so that they can identify the things that they do and how they match up with those goals and objectives. We set up just recently, I meet with them today, I think, Kendale, a focus group. I spent some time, we had some new promotees. We were talking about leadership, and one of the things I told them was, look, I've got people in the community that I call when something happens, something significant happens. And there's probably 16 to 20 of them. And they're the first to know. I call them when something happens. And I thought that was a good thing, but the supervisors looked at me like, well, you're calling somebody in the community, but we work for you. How come you don't tell us? And so we've created a focus group, and so there'll be an opportunity for them as often as they want to sit down with me and talk about the things so that we as leadership are in tune with really what's going on in the lives of those officers. Talk to them about educational opportunities, how we can improve that. We've gone away from getting everybody into a room and having discussions about training, and it's been more e-learning, and so we've got to find that balance here coming up. Lieutenants and sergeants, they are our frontline supervisors. We can talk here all day about what we've just talked about, but unless our sergeants and lieutenants internalize that and are aware of it and make sure that, and hold their officers accountable, then we've missed the boat. Sentinel event review, I think, is very significant. A Sentinel event is typically something when something negative has occurred. It's not because of one single event. It's a collection of things that went wrong in your process. And so it's bringing that to all the events that our officers go through, and it's pushing it all the way down to the street level. So when an incident occurs on a district, maybe it's a pursuit that ended well and everybody did well. I think it's important to bring those people together because there's a handful of people that participated in that. Talk about that. Is there anything that we can learn? Anything that other officers need to know? That goes all the way up to police action shootings. How do we review those? We haven't been very good at completing the circle, so we can review an event that happened on the police department, and we can identify things that we need to improve and things that we need to that went well that we need to communicate to everybody. And we identify them, but we don't do a very good job of following up on that and closing that loop. So that's one of the things that we want to focus on. Comprehensive plans, we do a lot of special events here in Indianapolis, and it's always important for us to be reviewing those plans, looking at what occurred, how can we improve that, and then not just reviewing it, but actually exercising and changing things up as needed. And that includes reviewing how the other cities and nations are handling catastrophic and significant events. The public health approach to violent reduction is, Director Babcock is here to talk about that part of it. We've done a good job of identifying what law enforcement is going to do, and historically we're very good at that. Where we miss out is the interaction with the public and getting the public involved in understanding the same thing that we know. So with that, I'll have Director Babcock come up and talk about it.
As I mentioned earlier, my name is Paul Babcock, Director of the Office of Public Health and Safety. Created at the beginning of the Mayor's administration to have IMPD Chief report directly to him, as well as the IFD Chief, and then allow the rest of the entities within the city, county enterprise to really focus on how we can bring a public health approach to public safety. And so throughout the course of today's presentation, we've really talked about gun violence and how gun violence impacts everyone in their community, from your next door neighbor to the person who lives across the street to the person you come and work with. And what we've done is we've really then couched that in a framework, as my friends from the health department and Eskenazi understand and talk about every day, a public health framework. And so we've defined the problem to be gun violence in our neighborhoods. Now we've identified risk factors, which include individual, family, your peers, and your neighborhood. So those include what type of education level you've gotten. Are you continuing to go to school? Do you have access to health care? Do you have friends who are associated with violence? Additionally, we've begun to develop interventions, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And then our key, and I think the most important part about this framework, is that we're going to measure the effectiveness. The Chief and IMPD have done a great job today of showing you the information they are able to collect, provide, and measure about how they, as a law enforcement entity, can really show the results in accountability. And now, on the other hand, we're going to begin to be able to measure and show how, from a community impact standpoint, a collective impact standpoint, all the efforts we've provided or putting together to really develop targeted interventions can make changes in our community. So at the end of the year, the mayor announced this new framework for really trying to address the violent crime and gun violence in our community. And so to dig down on why we wanted to bring a public health approach to gun violence, I would like to steal or borrow statistics from the Marion County Health Department. And I know Dr. Kane won't be upset because this is critically important to her as well. So as we've done the research on this, violence spreads in our neighborhoods through social networks. It's like the flu. We've talked about the flu and how it's impacting people across this country and across our community. It spreads from person to person through different vectors in the same way that violence does. If you have a friend who's committed a violent crime or you've committed a violent crime, your friend is more likely than not to either be a victim of violent crime or have committed one themselves. And then your friend on that second level of separation, that second degree of separation, is equally as likely to have committed a violent crime or to be a victim of one. And as Chief Bailey talked about earlier, that targeted intervention to individuals who are committing violent crime, we want to reach out to those individuals because they are the potential victims of violent crime and bring interventions to really address those issues. And you see from the health department's latest health assessment in our community, the leading cause of death for 15 to 25-year-olds is violent homicide. And that's critically important because this is impacting not only individuals 35 and up, it's really impacting our youth, the young people on a day-to-day basis who form the foundations of our community. And finally, I think this is additionally important and why we have to have a community involvement, a community collective impact approach. A quarter of our households in Marion County have indicators that increase the risk of being a victim of violent crime. So that includes food insecurity, which is why the mayor announced at the beginning of his campaign and then additionally in his administration, food was going to be a critical part of his policy platform, and so we're working towards that. Additionally, it's access to health care. It's access to quality education. It's access to transportation. So it's these neighborhood, these socioeconomic factors that we've really got to work on to help decrease the risk of our households and our neighborhoods from being victims of violent crime. So as the chief and I have talked about, there's a three-pronged approach: targeted law enforcement, which you've heard a lot about today, and then it's going to be targeted violence intervention by community members, which Lieutenant Arnett will talk about as well, and then a targeted influx of resources and support services. So the community component, as we've mentioned earlier and throughout the course of the past 2 months, hopefully in the next few weeks we'll be able to hire a director of community violence reduction. This is an individual who's going to wake up every day and focus on coordinating, measuring, and evaluating the effectiveness of our violence interruption, our violence intervention programs, similar to the way that the food policy person wakes up every day and thinks about food and food insecurity. This person's sole responsibility will be to think about every day, how do we decrease violent crime? What can we do to help the community to decrease violent crime? And really, what can we do to build stronger foundations in our neighborhoods to really help to weed out violent crime? Additionally, we're going to hire 4 district resource coordinators who report that director, and they'll provide day-to-day technical assistance, operational capacity to neighborhoods, to individuals, to organizations to build their capacity to really combat violent crime. And they'll work with Lieutenant Arnett and the community councils, which are already in place in each of the districts of IMPD, and focus on how do we really decrease youth violent crime. And finally, the resource component. We're going to partner with our health entities to expand Prescription for Hope. If you don't know, Prescription for Hope is a targeted violence intervention program based out of the Eskenazi Emergency Room, which really provides resources to an individual at that moment of, for lack of a better word, trauma, when they're in the ER due to some sort of violent event, and someone is able to offer them some services so that that event doesn't repeat itself. Additionally, we're going to inject $1 million over 3 years into our neighborhoods to support evidence-based violence reduction strategies. And I think this is critical because, one, like a vaccination, you have to inject targeted resources to prevent the spread of disease. The mayor is committed to injecting dollars and resources to support evidence-based violence reduction programs. So what we're doing here is we're going to fund programs that are successful, If these programs aren't successful, we're not going to fund them anymore, because there's resources out there, and we want to jumpstart them, we want to support them, but as good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars and people who believe in the effectiveness of violence interruption and evidence-based programs, we are only going to commit resources to those that are successful. And finally, larger overall capacity building training, technical assistance to neighborhoods and IMPD's district councils. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lieutenant Arnett to talk more about the effectiveness of the district councils thus far. Thank you.
Good morning. So you guys have heard quite a bit about the district council. So we have North District, Southeast, and East District. So if they could stand, I'd like for you just to recognize them. Okay, thank you. Okay, these folks have volunteered quite a bit of their time, and so I've got 4 points to talk about. Just a little bit about the councils. This was Chief Roach's vision, and he tasked me, Chris Reeder, and Sergeant Stewart to implement it. And although we were very excited when we started, I can't imagine a better group of people that we have that are involved with these councils. I mean, when you think about their volunteering their time, they're not getting paid for it. In addition to their personal lives, we have people that are represented from Eskenazi Health, United Way, and so you've got a lot of different organizations, and so to volunteer their time, we really appreciate it. So part of the process to implement these councils was initially from Chief Roach's call to action, and that happened back in March or February. And so these individuals from the community, from all walks of life, faith-based, we have just single moms and so on and so forth, but they responded to that call to action. And so as we received those names, we divided them up by the districts. And of course, I'm a little partial to North District because that's one of the districts that I actually facilitate. But each one of the districts have just great people. And so when you think about the common agenda for the councils, this is just a big part of communicating words such as partnership, empowerment, commitment. All of those words just touch upon the just the tip of the iceberg for what these individuals do. One thing I will say about Chief Roach, he's been very gracious because we've had probably 2 or 3 one-on-one conversations with the councils where they personally sat down with him and had some honest dialogue. And some of the things, they were honest. It wasn't all good. I mean, they shared their honest opinion, what they liked and what they didn't like. And I really appreciate that he took that time to do that. So the second point, which is listed up here, is mutually reinforcing the activities. Now, when you think about groups coming together, and we've all been involved in teamwork, sometimes you're going to get some people that are more outspoken. But what we've been trying to do with the groups is just to make sure that we hear everybody's voice, because we want to take advantage of all the resources that each one of these members on our council brings to the group. Communication, creating those relationships and those partnerships, particularly with the commanders. And I can appreciate the commanders taking time to come to the council meetings. The meetings are held once a month, and it's left up to the council members to determine when those meetings are held. But I will say the commanders, again, North District, I'm gonna, Commander Barker, he has been at every one, Commander Burton, but as well as all of the commanders are taking their time to listen to what their council members are saying. The backbone of the organization, again, I'm gonna probably talk about this just very briefly. When you think about the backbone, the community is the backbone. When we look at things that we want to do in regards to how we police the community and how we come up with our different initiatives, you have to look at the community and what those individuals in the community, what they're seeing, what they're saying. For me, because I am a police officer, we focus primarily on the enforcement. But you have to think about the community people. They're looking at more things like quality of life. But we also have to make sure that we give them the right resources to look at it from our perspective when we're looking at violence and guns. The last one, the common measures, we're looking to we're still working on this because as I mentioned before, we started these councils last year, and so we're still developing as we go along. The common measures to get the desired outcome, which is to reduce the crime. Chief Bailey mentioned the non-fatal victims that we're now supplying the councils with. And our hope is that we get some information from the councils that will help us in reducing these violent crimes. The only other thing I would like to do, if I can divert from the program a little bit, is have Chris Holland, Southeast Chair, I would like for him to come up and just to share why it's important for him to be involved in the council.
Good morning. Well, first of all, let me say thank you to Mr. Mayor and the chief, the chief's been extremely accommodating for the councils and the department. We have had the ability to go out in the community, walk door to door, knock on doors, talk to people in the community, ride with officers in the community, go to businesses, talk to business leaders. One of my questions that I always ask is, if the mayor gave us a check for $100,000 and I was able to give that to you in your hand today to reduce violent crime in your neighborhood, what would you do with it? What would you immediately do with that? And so we get those ideas from the people who live in those neighborhoods themselves, such as we have a lot of abandoned homes. I think every district's still dealing with a lot of abandoned homes, such as we need more street lights, or the street lights need lights in them. We have extremely dark alleyways. So those are the kind of things that we're working on to try to provide resources. It's a community resource district council, and to give them the resources they need to get things in their hands to reduce violent crime, help our officers on the street, and hopefully get everybody back home safe.
Lastly, I just want to add, if anyone is interested in being a part of any of the councils, you can email crdc@indy.gov, crdc@indy.gov, and we will be more than happy to give you information as well as to direct you which council, if it's by your address or by your company. Thank you.
Thanks. So I promise that this won't be this long, but I thought it was important that we share both what we've accomplished and kind of where we're going today. January, we did that this month. February, that Chris Bailey, his presentation about our gun initiatives, that will be the discussion in February. In March, we'll have Director Babcock back to kind of tie up those loose ends and identify, okay, how's that going to work, and how does the community council, how are they involved in that community piece of IVRP. In April, we want to come back and we want to talk to you about the beats. Here's how many we have. We'll have some new technology. Chief Connect referred to a new CAD, which is a computer-aided dispatch system. So when you call 911, it's all that information that goes to the officer's car, and at the same time a new RMS, which is a reporting system. Those will be new in 19, and so it's, we will talk a little bit about that technology and where we are with that. So having said that, I promise it won't be this long next time. Are there any questions?
I wonder if you could basically give us an assessment, whether it's the evolution of IMPD over the last year, couple of years, or the strategy against crime. Have we turned that corner? Do you think we've bottomed out and we're starting to come back to light at the end of the tunnel?
I think so, and I think it's because we have more opportunities with manpower. I think it's here recently we've been very concerned about the enforcement part, and I think that goes to the efficiency discussion that Chad talked about. I think as I walk around and talk to people within the community, I think we have increased the trust a little bit, so I think the communication between the community and the police department. I think these district councils and some of the things that Director Babcock is doing will enhance that a little bit. So I guess in a long-winded way, this is, we as a police department are promising you that we will continue to try and get better and better and better. But we've also realized that in order to turn that corner, it's got to be all in. We've got to have the community. We've got to be connected. We've got to listen from each other and learn in order to move forward.
And then any thoughts on, if we're looking at an overall, at least last year, decrease in crime and decrease in violent crime, why, whether it's an outlier or it's the last hardest nut to crack? It looks like January this year with 16 homicides run a record rate for the first month of the year, and also with your non-fatal shootings.
So our non-fatal shootings are down. Our homicides, you're correct, they're up. The numbers are what they are. It keeps all of us awake at night. I think it keeps those communities awake at night. I truly do think that we're on the right path in order to impact that. There are underlying reasons why people are shooting people. We can continue to lock them up. We continue to focus on them. But we've got to make the community and the police department and the whole criminal justice system has to say that if you're using a gun in a crime, there's going to be consequences to it. And not just law enforcement consequences, but it's the community that's got to stand up and say, we care about you. Why is it you're choosing that path? And here are some alternatives. And those resources have to be there when the community turns and asks for them. And so that's where the police department has to step back a little bit and let the community engage and develop that. Chris?
I have a question, actually, really a major concern, and I don't know if I'm not getting myself in trouble here, but when you find out that a felon can bond out over $500 without going before a judge, when you find out that people can commit crimes and get out with no money, and you start seeing and hearing guys tell you that the same people are, even in a couple of days period, getting back on the streets when they've been arrested for having illegal weapons, or how does that lead us towards the right direction as the community and as law enforcement officers? What dangers is that putting our men and women in who know they just went to the same house to arrest somebody, put them in jail, less than 24 hours they're out, $500? I don't think there's anybody in this room that believes that every drug dealer's not going to have a hard time finding $500. And in your thoughts, how is that going to help us when we're doing this work in the community to see those faces over and over again, and that not escalate now from a level 6 felony to a violent crime? When they're going to get out, never see a judge's face, judge never sees the case. I think we're working against ourselves a little bit there.
Yeah, so you're expressing some frustration that I think that you have and police officers have. But I'll say that that's a large discussion, and there are pros and cons to all this. You know, there are people in the community that will say that because of our effort in locking people up and putting them away has been a detriment and may be one of the reasons we're in the position that we are. And you have others that say, if you do lock them up and put them away, we wouldn't be in the position we are. But I think it's a conversation that all of us within the criminal justice system need to have. I've got a lot of respect from the prosecutor's office and the judges and the sheriff, and I think together we can work through that, and I think it's going to be some some crucial conversations.
Realistically, Chief, how soon do you expect this collaborative path forward to make a difference?
So it took us 6-7 months to get where we are with the district councils. You know, I think I certainly don't have all the answers, and I don't think there are members of our district councils that have all the answers. But I think you know, the expectation is at the end of the year, be able to say some of these things were accomplishments, and we'll have a long list of things in 18 like we did in 17. But I think the true number will be, were we able to reduce the violence? And then it's through Paul's help and that harm reduction model, how do we measure that, right? And what were the things that didn't work? Let's throw those out and let's start focusing on the things that did work and maybe even get better. So I'm a short timer, right? The mayor's a short timer probably. So at the end of this year, there needs to be some direction downward in our violence.
Chief, of the anti-gun violence news just laid out, in your opinion, what are the most important, what do you think will be the most effective moving forward?
The collaborative effort with all our federal partners, the U.S. Attorney, the Prosecutor's Office, being very targeted of those people that are using those guns for violence. It's not all guns, it's crime guns. And at the same time, finding some way to send the message that if you use a gun in a crime, there are going to be consequences to it. And we've got to send that message and create that message. If you're on parole and you're on probation and you have a propensity for violence, then we're going to be there. Probation's going to be there, parole's going to be there, and hopefully the judges will help us impact that. I think it's important that the public know what it is we're doing, the direction that we're going, and quite frankly, the ultimate is for the community to have all the information that we have as a police department about the violence, because we've certainly proven that we can't do it by ourselves, and so it's enlisting help. It's trying to get people onto our district councils. It's trying to get people involved. Those people that have resources, it's trying to get them to understand that it needs to be targeted and it needs to be measured. I guess we want people to throw up their hands and say, how can we help? And I see a lot of that, and it's how do you focus that, how do you target that, how do you bring all that together? And I think that's where we're struggling, is putting a structure around that and really leaning on Director Babcock to help us with that community part.
Hey, Chief, you mentioned that preliminary data shows that overall crime is down.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have, but yeah, you're right. That was last year, so that was, so our reporting system, the RMS, depending on what the officer calls the crime, it gets counted, right? The reason I say it's dirty is because sometimes what the crime is listed at is initially, that's not what it turned out to be. And that's where I talk about where we clean that data and give it to UCR. So UCR is the clean data. Our RMS is, and you understand this, RMS is the dirty data. Historically, though, our dirty data, although the numbers may be off, the percentage up or down is a guide for us in order to address real-time needs. And right now, that data looks like it's down. Don't hold me to the percentages, but overall crime appears to be down based on our dirty data. And I think it's important because it's the men and women of the police department. We always talk about the homicides and the non-fatal shootings, but there is an awful lot of good work going on in the community. Anyone else? Well, thank you for coming. Appreciate it.